for an immediate ceasefire deal and an end to what they describe as the genocide in Gaza. We have an update.
Israel's military says the bodies of the 6 hostages were recovered from Khan Yunis. The overnight recovery operation was carried out by the IDF alongside the security agency Shin Bet. The 6 men had all been kidnapped near Israel's border fence with Gaza during Hamas's attacks on southern Israel on the 7th of October. Meanwhile, Israeli police and Israel's domestic security agency have declared Sunday evening's explosion in Tel Aviv a terror attack. Hamas's armed wing, Al-Qassam Brigades, has claimed responsibility for the explosion. Israel's police force says the person suspected of carrying out the explosive material was killed, while a passerby sustained injuries.
Further, the intense efforts we're engaged in across our government.
On the flip side, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says Israel has accepted a proposal to bridge gaps in ongoing ceasefire negotiations, and the next step now is for Hamas to accept, ahead of further negotiations expected to take place later this week. Despite the claims of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's agreement to the bridging proposal, there are still significant challenges before a deal can actually be reached.
The single best way, obviously, to get hostages home, to get an enduring ceasefire that also reflects Israel's security interests, to relieve the terrible daily suffering of Gazans, men, women, and children, desperate for food to eat, for shelter, and for staying out of harm's way.
Negotiators are still working on specific details on how an agreement would be implemented. Hamas has denied that it has agreed to the peace proposal, as alleged by the U.S. Secretary of State, insisting Israel is buying time on peace negotiations. And in the United States, as Democrats gathered at their convention on Monday to present Vice President Kamala Harris as their presidential nominee, several Palestinian human rights advocates stormed the venue, chanting they will not vote for Kamala Harris unless she agrees to an arms embargo against Israel. They demanded the seal of a hostage release deal and an immediate permanent ceasefire in the war in Gaza. The protesters also held signs linking Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden to the atrocities in Gaza, which they described as a genocide consisting of an effort to destroy the Palestinian people through bombing and starvation.
11 months now trying to send a message to the Biden administration. They can create a ceasefire now. They need to stop the flow of American weapons. All of us, we're tired of seeing the images of women and children and communities in Gaza decimated by U.S. weapons.
As you know, I wrote a peace treaty for Gaza. A few days ago, I put forward a proposal that brought us closer to doing that than we've done since October 7th. We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now.
The war is still raging, with reports of a school bombed in Gaza City and 10 persons arrested in a West Bank raid.
Let's explore this further, especially this lingering war between Israel and Hamas, as we bring in an international law expert, Livingston Witchy. Good to have you join us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if you follow that report we just played there, you would realize, or you would hear the very last part, which is a soundbite from the president of the U.S. talking about how they've been working round the clock for this new deal. But we understand that Israel has agreed to the deal. But Hamas is now accusing the U.S. of bias and just buying time for Israel to continue its actions in Gaza. What's your reaction to all of that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's a very difficult middle that parties have found themselves, because this is what you can best describe as a precarious situation. Very sadly, that civilians have become high casualties in this war. Hamas has raised very vital concerns, accusing Israel and the US of conniving to breach the original framework of the ceasefire as proposed by Biden, and coming up with a new proposal which appears to be what they are now describing as blind bias on the part of the US. I think the issue here is the lack of trust between Israel, a sovereign state, and Hamas, a terrorist organization. The US and the other Middle East countries need to come up straight on these issues and deal with the danger that we now face of losing more civilian casualties. This brickbat of accusations and counter-accusations will continue to snowball this whole war into resulting in more civilian casualties. So it's important that Israel has to show a measure of honesty and genuineness in this negotiation, particularly if for no other, but for the fact that innocent lives are lost in this war. Look at Hamas launching an attack, a suicide attack in Tel Aviv, and Israel attacking a site where school children are victims in this circumstance. My thinking is that Israel, America, Hamas, Palestine, Egypt, Iran, and other parties who are involved in this negotiation, Kuwait, have to be very firm and come up with an all-agreed document for a ceasefire, because it has now gone beyond the subject matter or the bone of contention. Now civilians are being used as guinea pigs in this war, which is not acceptable.
And
it is totally unacceptable.
Sorry to interrupt you, because you've raised a very critical point. The idea of having everyone come to the table, because now it is not just longer. I mean, if you have been following the events of the last few weeks, the attacks from Hezbollah, and then retaliatory attacks from Israel, and then the one in Iran. You've seen all of that attacks almost becoming an escalating war in the region. And I just wanted to ask you, if we do not have other parties involved in this peace, a ceasefire deal, if you secure a ceasefire deal without a more robust peace deal for the Middle East, what is the implication of that?
No, the implication of that will be what Assisi, the Prime Minister, I think, of Egypt, told Blinken, that if Israel is not compelled by the US to shift back in its occupation of some of the territories that it now occupies to launch this attack in Gaza against Hamas, where civilians are dying, it will become a regional war. That is what Assisi said during the visit of Blinken to him. And I think it's important because this has gone beyond religious or ethno-religious affiliations or solidarity. You've rightly mentioned there are other warring parties in this conflict. Hezbollah is there. There are other organizations, armed groups in this armed conflict that stand to equally challenge and confront the other opposing parties. Remember, Iran has also threatened that some of the attacks that have been launched will also greet its own reprisal. Palestine has also raised some kinds of threats against Israel. So this negotiation has to be all involving. You have to identify all the interest groups. They all have to come to the table, because what I see in the issue I raised earlier on, being that of the lack of trust in this negotiation, is what is necessitating the continuous attacks, not minding the fact that there is an agreement for a truce, for a ceasefire. As long as that has not been implemented, parties still do not trust the genuinity of their commitment in this war. So the principal figures driving this negotiation have to consider bringing the respective warring parties, such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, to a table and have an agreement. It has to be a win-win thing to an extent, because sadly, it's become what you may describe as a Hydra-headed situation. Look at what is playing out between Russia and Ukraine, where Ukraine
and Mr. Livingston, just to quickly come in here, just a minute, because I wanted to ask you, first of all, because we understand that the U.S. has given a one-week deadline for this to be signed. Does the U.S. have that leverage to enforce that sense of urgency in signing this new deal? And then I also wanted to, just talk more. That's one question on one hand, and then also to talk about the fact that we saw in the Trump administration a very robust Middle East peace plan, which was, the Abrahamic Accords. Is that something that you've seen in this particular administration? Does it seem like the Biden administration has or have any Middle East plan at all?
The thing is, if you go down history, some of these efforts being put up now had been employed in the past. And that's why they call for a more robust stakeholder participation in this negotiation process is very, very important. There may not be an absolute solution to this issue, but there will be a measure of containment to the conflict if parties agree. But the challenge here now is where Hamas is already picking holes in the disposition of the U.S. in this war. No doubt America has a soft spot for Israel. No doubt Egypt also has a soft spot for maybe Palestine. The neighboring countries within the Middle East region have a camaraderie, solidarity amongst themselves to ensure that there is an independent Palestinian state. So it becomes important. Hey, they say equity aids the vigilant, not the indolent. In this case, I think time is of the essence to ensure that this ceasefire deal is reached. And Blinken has rightly said that Israel has accepted Hamas's proposal and urging Hamas to accept Israel's proposal, but they must show a measure of commitment that indicates seriousness. Because if that seriousness is not achieved, number one, there will still be leakages and loopholes that will justify further attacks and counterattacks. And on the other hand, it is very important to state that if there is not a robust stakeholder participation in this whole negotiation, you cited the Abrahamic Accord, if there is no robust negotiation process that involves all the warring, the principal warring parties, will be going back and forth in this war. And it will be almost a journey of no return, and more lives will be lost, mind you.
And
Israel is believed to be highly sophisticated in this war. Hamas is using civilian shield. It's not even the direct Hamas soldiers that are dying as much as the innocent
and
civilians.
The U.S. Secretary of State has also. The U.S. Secretary of State has also alluded to what you just said when he said, look, perhaps this is the last chance. After now, there might not be another chance to enforce a ceasefire deal. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see how things play out. Always a pleasure to have you on. International law expert, Livingstone Wiche.